I arrived in Perth yesterday directly from San Francisco, where I was working with leaders from night communities, seeing the Market Street Prototyping Festival that Night sponsored. And that same week we sponsored an event called The Future of Open Cities, How the Maker Mindset is Reinventing Public Life with the Institute for the Future. 2 weeks before that, we announced 32 innovative projects in 12 cities that will share $5 million as winners of the Night Cities Challenge. And a week before that, we launched an $11 million demonstration project in Philadelphia we call Reimagining the Civic Commons. I mention all those things because I want to take the next few minutes and tell you a little bit about what we learned from each of those events in hopes that you'll take some inspiration from them in your own communities and in your own work. In fact, I want to assert that public is not only, as Tanya said, about us and for us, but it is by us. Let me just give you another word about the Knight Foundation, because I know you're probably not familiar with the foundation. It is US-based. We're based in Miami, but we're the legacy of Jim and Jack Knight, two brothers who owned a collection of newspaper chains across the US. And so we continue to invest in those communities where the Knight brothers own newspapers. That leaves us with 26 communities across the US. And we have 4 portfolios. We invest in arts, we invest in media innovation, journalism, and then the portfolio I run, which is community and national initiatives, where we do about half the foundation's giving every year. I want to know about those of you in the room. Can you just tell me who among you is an artist? Artists, hello. Designers, other designers? Yes, architects, landscape architects, great. Public officials? Oh, good, look, public officials, way to go. Any electeds among you? Oh, look, thank you very much. We appreciate all you do. I know your work is hard. Enrique made that point. You saw that big opposition, right? Take away a parking space and there you go. You lose all your public support. Are there any planners? Who are the planners in the room? All right, and some NGOs maybe? Yes, okay, great. Now I know a little bit about you, that's good. So each of you has a different perspective on city making. You come to this conversation with different skill sets and different experiences. And I know you're working in organizations that all have different cultures that make it either more or less difficult to take risks. And I think it's the differences among us that will make this an exciting conversation over the next 3 days. But I also think there ought to be some truths that sort of underpin, that form a common foundation for the city-making work that you try to do and that you will do together. So let me just start by offering 5 broad propositions really quickly that form, I believe, a strong rationale for your placemaking work and for ours at the Knight Foundation. First, the percentage of college-educated people in your population explains 58% of success. If you measure success instead of by happiness, Enrique, by per capita income. You can tell I'm from the US. What can I say? Okay, so college-educated, it also turns out that college-educated 25 to 34-year-olds are the most mobile people in our society. Once you pass 34, you tend to form a lot of roots in your community and you don't move nearly as often. 2/3, and Jeff said this, 2/3 of college graduates 25 to 34-year-olds say first they choose the city they want to live in, then they look for a job. So quality of place plays an outsized role in the economy. So if college-educated 25 to 34-year-olds play an outsized role in your economy, and they say they choose first the place they want to live, then they look for a job, then place, right, plays an the appeal, the attraction of your place plays an outsized role in your economy. Number 4, quality of place, it turns out, and this is important, also plays an outsized role in creating opportunity for people who are not college educated, with less education and with less income. Because it turns out two things are important. First of all, research shows that people with less education and less income do better when they live in close proximity in the same community with people with more education and with more income. It just simply creates opportunity. Poverty's bad, but living in concentrated poverty is far worse. Second, the new research shows that intergenerational economic mobility, the ability of someone who is born in a poor neighborhood to or in poor circumstances, to transcend those circumstances and to gain additional income is very much favored by the ability of that person, that poor person, to live, again, in close proximity to people with more income. I haven't studied Australian cities, but in the U.S., we understand this is, well, we don't understand. I think, like Enrique says, it's a new idea. But we're beginning to talk about, at least, the fact that this is an urgent imperative, because it turns out that there are many more, like twice as many more, census tracts in the U.S. that are where poverty is concentrated, high poverty is concentrated, than there were in 1970. So in the past 40 years, we have barely flipped any neighborhoods in the U.S. from high poverty to below average poverty, and where that's occurred generally has been in either the central business districts or the neighborhoods that are immediately adjacent to central business districts. So I think there are some important lessons to learn there. And then fifth, again, among these sort of broad truths that I hope form a common foundation for our city making, is getting more people to live life in public is fundamental to civic engagement. And Enrique spent the last hour talking brilliantly about that. And then, and how you do it. And then living life in public and civic engagement then is fundamental to city making. I think the time has very much passed when you could get the right 10 guys in a room and decide the future of a city. When I started in this business, you could actually do that. But today, the future of a city really depends, I think, on thousands of people making hundreds of decisions every day about what they believe about the future of a city and their role in it. And when people can regularly occupy public space together, pleasantly, with strangers, they are more likely to see what they have in common as a community. And so that civic engagement becomes the effect, if you will, of that engagement. So I could summarize this as talent, opportunity, and engagement. Those are the building blocks, I believe, for a successful city. And then place, done well, done right, done thoughtfully, can turbocharge all three of those things. So if that's the case, and just bear with me, then my question would be, how do we make those kinds of places? How do we make those kinds of places that will indeed turbocharge talent, opportunity, and engagement that are so fundamental to the success of our communities? Well, I want to share with you a few things that we're learning from our recent investments at Knight Foundation, and particularly the four that I mentioned earlier. As I said, I've just come from the Market Street Prototyping Festival in San Francisco. Now, Market Street is the city's best-known street. It sort of cuts across 3 miles of the city. It's a spine. 3 miles from the Embarcadero, the water, up to the hills of Twin Peaks. Unfortunately, it's also unrelentingly the same for 3 miles. And in many cases, it's pretty tired. Its last redesign was in the 70s, so time for a redo, right? Well, San Francisco, after spending 3 years and a whole lot of money to engage what amounts to a paltry number of citizens to come up with a plan for a redesign of Market Street, using a traditional approach to planning and participation, the city did a major pivot. Instead of trying to do it all, to try to do it top down and do it traditionally, the city decided, important, the city decided to remake itself as a platform for action, deciding that good government actually means more collaboration. So the city planning department, John, I hope you're going to talk a little bit about this, John Bella, when he speaks. But the city planning department turned to Gale Studios and the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, a hotbed of contemporary art in San Francisco and civic activity, to develop a new approach to redesigning Market Street, something that would forego top-down, forego government doing it all, forego the traditional civic participation methods. How many of you have ever been to a public meeting? Okay, all the masochists in the room. Yeah, just raise their hands. Maybe, I don't know about, hey, maybe you guys have figured it out, but in U.S. cities, what is codified and required as citizen participation is beyond grim. And, you know, if I were a government official, I think I'd slit my wrist regularly at public meetings. But so what happened is they decided they would take a new approach. And together they decided they would invite, they would nurture, and they would harvest good ideas from the community for Market Street, with a very big focus on artists and designers, by prototyping 50 ideas to enliven Market Street over 3 days. And that festival just concluded on Saturday, and it was a huge success. The festival produced this diversity of ideas that a single planning agency would never, ever have imagined. 50 designers built their projects and stayed to talk to thousands of visitors, while hundreds of research volunteers sort of followed their every move. The eventual plan for Market Street is going to derive now from those 50 projects and the reactions that citizens had to those projects. And I think it proved so clearly that streets and sidewalks can absolutely engage people more fully in the life of their city, and with strangers with whom they share public space. Those projects had strangers talking at every turn. Strangers were playing ping pong with one another. They were pushing these oversized, wonderful chimes. They were sunning themselves on climbing structures. They were synchronizing, stomping on platforms, while people sitting across from them had to sit on a bench to make fountains appear. It's quite inventive. People entered these caves of blowing white plastic like a maze to sit inside in the interior court that was eerily quiet for Market Street. People chalked the place up when they were invited, and they peed in a garden. Yes, really. It was quite a scene. But just as important, I think, as the what of this festival was the how. The festival was produced jointly by the city and its arts partner. The partnership, in fact, was so seamless that they were spending half of their time, the staff for this festival were spending half of their time at Yerba Buena Center and half at City Hall. They agreed that the collective intelligence of this cross-sector partnership inspired them all. And they swear this is now will become the way they do business in the future. This will become normal. Imagine that. I think that's pretty extraordinary. It's so far beyond what we imagined when we started Art Place, to build the field of creative placemaking and to recognize all the phenomenal people that were already doing this work, like Theaster, like John. I think we imagine creative placemaking as having a big impact on cities and the way people experience cities. We didn't anticipate that kind of partnership that is now deeply influencing the way the city thinks of itself and its role. That's pretty exciting. And what they just demonstrated at Market Street, I think, is also, it's so far beyond what we know as creative placemaking, or what we know as percent for art, or what we know as public art. This is something very different in terms of the how. I think it's the kind of collaboration that can really change everything, because providing solutions to the community, they found, doesn't galvanize support in the same way as inviting people to remake their own community. And that gets pretty exciting. As they describe it, prototyping, which is what that was, inverts the traditional planning model. The public defined its priorities. Government then provided a platform and focus for ideation around the priorities. The public was invited to lead the design process by submitting ideas. Then together, the government and public, represented by those with winning project ideas and those who attended the festival, tested the designs at the festival, and then together they will evaluate the results thanks to the observations and interviews done at the festival and define success. And in the case of Market Street, then government will execute. But I think in other cases it could just as easily be the public that executes. Now, I must say parenthetically, there's something that gives me hives a little bit about talking about government and the public, because government is the public, right? Government is simply a reflection of what we choose, what we can't do alone and we choose to do together. That's what government is. But in this case, I will say the government and the formal government and the bureaucracy and the public working together, I think, is changed maybe forever in San Francisco. A variation on the same theme of crowdsourced solutions is the $5 million that we awarded in the Night Cities Challenge a few weeks ago, where, again, we announced 34 winners, 12 cities from the 7,000 entries we received from people who submitted their ideas for making their cities better. We issued a very simple call. We said, give us your best idea for making your city better. And then in the next paragraph, we asked specifically for ideas that would accelerate talent, opportunity, and engagement. Imagine evaluating 7,000 ideas. That was fun, but it was also worth it. As a philanthropic organization, Knight distributes about $125 million each year, something a little more than that, in grants. And we like to believe we're open and accessible to anyone with a good idea. But I think the overwhelming response to the city's challenge reminds us that, A, we simply don't know all the people with good ideas, and they don't feel they don't know how to come to a foundation with their idea. And two, we sure don't have all the good ideas. And to me, that's very similar to what the city of San Francisco must be thinking right now. You know, these are not the ideas that were out on Market Street that caused such an engagement, such interaction, so much fun. Was so appealing that it completely animated Market Street on Saturday. Those are ideas, again, the city would not have had. We would not have had the ideas from Night Cities Challenge, nor would those people have, for the most part, have felt comfortable coming to Night. They simply would not have known how to get to us. And I think that it really shows that if you have a focused, crowdsourced process, it can be incredibly fertile to problem solving. And in the case of Night, we're not only putting those kinds of challenges, open source challenges out there, we're also building a network of civic innovators across our cities in the U.S., both through the challenge and through the the travel we sponsor for city officials, NGO leaders, and artists and designers to share learning events together, which is what brought us last week to the Institute for the Future's Open Cities conference. And I want to talk a minute about this because I think it very much reinforces what we saw at Market Street and what we experienced in the Night Cities Challenge. Open cities are those that create new forms of participation so that more people can participate in both the commercial and the civic life. They are designed for sharing. They inspire creativity by their openness and invitation, and they stimulate the imagination. They create adaptable public space, and they strive to create equitable access across the population. So think participation, imagination, adaptability, shareability, equity. Those are the characteristics, I think, that define an open city. So you think Uber or Airbnb or ShareTribe, which is like Airbnb in a box for anything you want to share, platforms that are used to orchestrate urban life. Or think about non-digital platforms like the little free libraries. Do you guys have those? The little free libraries, the boxes that appear, that people put in unusual places, that are a free exchange of books. Those things that, again, non-digital, but being expanded all over the world, fostering learning globally while prototyping locally. Or the platforms such as Kickstarter and IOB that harness crowds and micro contributions, because it turns out when you ask somebody to do something that's pretty simple, they'll pretty much do it. It's really easy to get them to do it. So open cities are all about sourcing new ideas, new tools, new markets, and new money, and making them available to everybody. Think about that. It's really breathtaking. And for me, Enrique talked about equity, and I think he does such a beautiful job of explaining how we can think about our public space, particularly our streets, where we have so much of our cities invested, in making them equitable and democratic spaces. But I think this notion of equity is, how you get there is really hard. I mean, can you get there? I'm not sure. But there's something about this. If you think about open cities in their potential, I mean, if you just live in that potential for a minute and think about the possibility of opening up resources and tools and money and markets to everybody, providing that access very broadly, and not just thinking about it as rich-poor or opening that up to poor people, but think about opening it up to cities, Charles, that I think are in that, are not experiencing the vortex of the London, the San Francisco, where so much talent is going, right? Talent is flocking to a few places in America. Part of our, in the world, part of our challenge, I think, is to figure out how do we use our latent talent, and how do we equip it with markets and tools and money. So I think there's so much for us to be learned from the open cities movement, because in open cities, in any platform, having everybody participate is actually good for everybody. Because the hallmark of a good open city platform is, or any platform, think about Facebook, forget cities, think about Facebook. When more people participate, new value is generated. When more people participate, new value is generated. It's a fundamental shift from our scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset. It's interesting, if you think about the past 40 years, for those of us who can think about the past 40 years, one sign of success was that you didn't need to be in relationship with anyone you didn't choose to be in relationship with. You could live in a gated community. You could enjoy your own private pool in your own backyard. You can enjoy a private gym membership and send your kids to private schools. You could drive your car to work in the morning and drive it home again in the evening, straight into your private garage. But the vast majority of the sharing economy requires us to be in some kind of relationship with others. It also requires an enormous amount of trust among strangers. And it feels like the beginning of a very different way to relate to others and to our community. I hope so, because I think we'll all be stronger for it. And that just brings me to one final initiative I want to talk about, and that's one we call Reimagining the Civic Commons. It's an $11 million demonstration project that Knight is funding in Philadelphia in collaboration with the William Penn Foundation, and its premise is very simple. The original democratizing spaces in our communities, libraries, parks, schoolyards, recreation centers, are today, for the most part, disinvested. They're misaligned with today's consumer interest, and they are disconnected from one another. They increasingly serve a slice of the public that cannot afford to opt out of private alternatives. Now, there's nothing healthy about this, particularly, again, when you consider that economic integration is a key ingredient in upward mobility, and that services that only serve the poor, unfortunately, usually turn out to be poor services. As Enrique said, in a good city, no one should feel inferior. So we're conducting this great experiment to see if we can return civic assets to their original role of serving the broadest spectrum of the community, and in so doing, return them to their original purpose as democratizing spaces. We believe our best hope for doing this is to connect those assets, get them out of their silos, and connect them into what we're calling a civic commons that operates beyond the silos of any one city department, of any one specialty, and of any one market. There are some few occasions when my job is actually thrilling, and this attempt to reimagine the civic commons is one of those, because every single community in the US and in many countries around the world possess this same collection of civic assets. And in many cities, they are just as beleaguered as those in Philadelphia. The point is that we have a vast collection of assets, what Enrique called resources, in our communities, our streets and sidewalks, as he talked about, our libraries and parks and recreation centers, our automobiles and our extra bedrooms, our ingenuity and our creativity, our people and their talent that are today underused. It's latent potential. It's underused. Now imagine what our communities would be like if we could develop all of those assets and put all of those assets to work. Charles, in his book, The Creative City, which for me is still kind of the Bible of inspiration on cities, wrote that our cities don't need a few extraordinary creative people. They need 10,000 creative people. I think Charles was way ahead of his time when he wrote that, and I think the world is finally catching up to that wisdom. Enrique said, new ideas are never born with majority support. I love that. New ideas are never born with majority support. And I hope that Public 2015 will advance this idea of the power of broadly held opportunity, democratically shared assets, and broadly shared rewards, not just for Western Australia, but for the world. Thanks.